Hey everyone, welcome to As the World Churns. I am Andy Levy here as always with Danielle Moody, and today we are talking about what Donald Trump calls a big beautiful bill, what I am calling an ugly fucking bill. The House stayed up all night to fuck us, basically, and passed a bill that delivers tax cuts for the wealthy and benefits cuts for the rest of us. The bill has very, very strict work requirements for Medicaid, which is going to affect millions of people and not the people that Republicans claim it will. And it's an absolute disaster. The only good news is it still has to pass the Senate. And so fingers crossed, there's a chance it won't pass there, but it passed the House with every Democrat voting against it, those who are still living anyway. So Danielle, yeah, where do we go from here with this awfulness?
So the big, beautiful piece of shit that Donald Trump has offered up to America is, funny enough, all of the things that he said that he would do.
Yeah.
So for people that are shocked that Medicaid was going to be on the table, I'm old enough to remember when Joe Biden stood before a joint session of Congress and said, Republicans are going to cut Medicaid. Republicans are going to cut Social Security. And all of the Republicans, right, were screaming, no, liar, X, Y, and
Yeah.
Z. And then fast forward, where are we? In a space where you're requiring people who already are facing difficulties, who require government assistance, now have to work because the whole idea with Republicans is that if you are poor or working class, somehow you're just trying to get over on the government. So we need to set up disciplinary actions and punishment in order to ensure that you're not getting over. But the people who are actually fucking getting over on the government are the ones that they are giving tax breaks to, the ones that don't need those tax breaks, the ones that if they pay just a little bit more, then hundreds of millions of people could live in, I don't know, good standing, like not worry about making decisions between prescription drugs and eggs, not worry about paying for their kids' school and childcare and all of these things. But we live in a greedy, disgusting, capitalist driven country where Republicans are enshrining oligarchy with this bill. That's what it looks like to me, right? Is that when you are extending tax cuts to the top 1% and then extolling out pain for the majority of Americans, you are encapsulating oligarchy and protecting it and helping it expand. And that is nothing that Mike Johnson should be smiling into the faces of cameras with. He is the weakest and
Yeah.
poorest example of a Speaker of the House that I think that we have ever seen gets this bill over with one vote, and Donald Trump is typing in all caps about how amazing it is that it passed. It's embarrassing.
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely the weakest Speaker of the House we've seen since the last guy.
It's been
But
so long since him, you
I
know?
know, I
And I
know.
actually long for the days of McCarthy. Is that not insane?
I know. You miss his limp gavel, don't you,
I
Danielle?
do I do.
I said when I started that these Medicaid cuts are gonna hurt not the people that they are telling you they're gonna hurt, but a different group of people. I want to expand on that a little bit. We've seen a lot. Media Matters did a really good piece on this. The Republican claim here is that, oh, we are stopping able-bodied men from collecting Medicaid. You had shills like Jesse Waters saying, "Oh, if you're 28 years old and healthy, you don't even want to work. You just collect Medicaid," which of course is, one of those things that's absolutely not true. It really echoes the Reagan-esque
Mhm.
the Reagan-esque welfare queen rhetoric from back in the 80s for those of us olds who remember that. But it's not just Fox News, it's a lot of the right-wing stuff out there has been talking about, they keep saying, able-bodied people, and they make it sound like it's people who simply don't wanna work and just wanna collect Medicaid. Here's a couple of facts, that Media Matters pulled together.
Mm-hmm.
92% of people on Medicaid, are either working or have a disability or are doing things that exempt them from meeting work requirements. And I want to get into that because most of the able bodied, non working Medicare recipients, 79% of them are women who live in rural areas who are caring for elderly parents or adult children, and they have maybe recently left the workforce because they have to be a caregiver. These are the people that this bill is screwing over. It's not some 28-year-old dude who just wants to play video games all day. This is the classic Republican rhetoric of trying to, first of all, shame people
Mm-hmm.
who are depending on Medicaid because they are, in fact, a caregiver for a relative. They are helping out, whether it's, again, an elderly parent or whether it's an adult child that has problems. So it's just it makes me so angry when people like Jesse Waters, who, let's be honest, hasn't worked an honest day in his life and is basically the recipient of conservative welfare, as most people these days on Fox News
Mm.
are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when they sit there and say shit like this, and they do not know what they're talking about, and they don't care that they don't know what they're talking about, but for someone like him, some comfortable, privileged asshole like him, sorry for the language, sits there and talks about this, and the people that are being harmed by this are people who are just out there trying their best, trying to take care of a sick parent or trying to take care of a disabled child, and it's so disgusting. But that's who these people are, and we know that, Danielle.
You say those statistics and it conjures images, right? It conjures images of people who are living, like you said, in rural America. Those are the people who don Trump hats, who went to his rallies, who applaud the
I
deportations,
know.
who applaud
I know.
the book bans, who applaud the cruelty and the harm. And here it comes back to them. And I said this the other day. I said, I don't know if any of those people, even given this bill that will ultimately cost, first of all, cost the American people more money, right? But that they will regret their vote. And I don't know if I'm seeking regret or just like the I told you so at this point, but it's just like I don't know how much collective pain is necessary for people to realize who the Republican fascist party is. And I think that this bill, if it passes the Senate, will destroy families, will destroy lives. Like lives will be lost because of this bill,
Yeah.
right? Jobs will be lost because of this bill, because not only that, and on later on an interview that I did, the rollback in clean energy protections is going to cost this country almost a million jobs, right? Almost a million jobs on top of America's standing in the world as as an innovator, as a change maker, leaving room for countries like China. So it's just like you take all of these things into consideration. And I mean, I don't believe that we will have midterms or elections again that actually are free and fair. But even if we do, I still feel that the people who are harmed by this will still think that, like, Donald Trump is fighting for them. I don't know what it's going to take. Maybe, when we look more like Russia than we do America in the coming year, maybe that will wake them up. But I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah, and I wanna point out one group that does know that Donald Trump is not fighting for them, and that's transgender people. And I wanna point out something that this bill does, and a lot of people were talking about this online. The original bill had a provision in it that would ban Medicaid funds for being used for the care of minors in terms of transgender healthcare. In the middle of the night, they went ahead and dropped the language that had to do with minors. And the bill now bans care for transgender people, period, who are on Medicaid, and also prohibits people who get their health care from the healthcare exchange, Obamacare, the Affordable
Mhm.
Care Act. It bans those insurance policies from covering transgender care. And again, you talked about people dying, and here's just another example of that. And again, they sneak in this language because they pretend it's about the quote unquote kids, when we all know it's not. It's not about the kids, it's not about sports. It's just that they do not like transgender people. And so again, we have to hope that this doesn't pass the Senate, because this is going to be absolutely god awful for trans
Mhm.
folks
Mhm.
if this becomes the law of the land.
There is nothing big or beautiful about this. It's just bullshit.
Nope. Yep.
Here we have now this, like, there are some stories that come out these days, and I'm just like, the Onion must be out of business, right? Because the things that Donald Trump is saying, the things that are happening in the Oval Office feel like a fucking joke. And, this week, I can't even say Donald Trump welcomed, but the South African, like, because that would be a lie. The South
Yeah.
African
Hosted.
president
Hosted.
hosted, I guess is the right word. So this week, Donald Trump hosted South African President Ramaphosa to a meeting in this fucking. Let me tell you something. This Oval Office is it looks like a fucking pawn shop. It is
It's so
so
gross.
gaudy and gross.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
can't, like, honestly, it's like if you
I
ask
know.
the interior designers of, like, the gaudiest Atlantic City trashiest hotel to redo the Oval Office, this is what you'd get. But aside from that, President Ramaphosa shows up in the Oval Office and throws serious shade at Donald Trump. And everybody, like, and Donald Trump is just either too stupid or just like I think it's just that he's too stupid to get it. So he says to him, "Well, sorry, I don't have a plane to offer you." Right? And basically calling out the fucking Qatar grift that Donald Trump has just openly accepted a bribe from Qatar in terms of a $400 million luxury plane that is going to cost the American people tens of millions of dollars to retrofit to turn it into Air Force One. President Ramaphosa is like, yeah, sorry, I don't have that, because maybe then you would, like, give us some play, give us some consideration other than the fucking lies that you're spreading about white Afrikaners. And here goes this motherfucker talking about, oh, if you had a plane to give me, I'd take it. I could, like, Andy, like,
I know.
like,
I know.
I feel like the TMJ from my jaw consistently dropping to the ground, right? Like, is that gonna be covered under insurance moving forward? Is the stress gonna be covered? Because what the fuck? I
It probably won't be covered, because someone will think that the T stands for trans.
You're right. You're right.
So they'll ban it. Yeah, I mean, look, Trump has President Ramaphosa over, and he is just, he's going on and on about this quote unquote
Lie.
white genocide
Mhm.
in South Africa that doesn't exist,
Nope.
and this whole thing with the farmers. And a whole bunch of organizations, to their credit, published fact checks of this. Without getting into it, there is no genocide of white farmers in South Africa. It is a wholly made up thing. Like, it's not even that there's like a kernel of truth that's being
No.
exaggerated. it,
No.
it is simply completely being made up out
Mhm.
of whole cloth, as they say. There's another story that Trump keeps telling about how they're taking land from white farmers and giving it to black people. This happens very, very rarely. It dates back to the ending of
Apartheid?
apartheid. Yeah. And it's been largely unsuccessful because around 75% of the privately owned farmland in South Africa is owned by whites.
Correct.
I
In
believe
a
it's
black country. I just want like
yes. Yes. South Africa is 80% black. Black people own 4% of the private farmland.
and that seems right to Donald Trump and Elon Musk. That seems like that's accurate, right? Like
But it doesn't seem right to them because apparently they're upset that it's not 100% owned by
correct.
white
Yeah, you're right.
people. And this just goes on and on. Trump plays these videos. He shows these pictures that are not what he says they are. He
The
showed
pictures weren't even from South Africa.
they were from the Democratic Republic of Congo, but he's trying to make it sound like these pictures of body bags were from South Africa. It is absolutely unbelievable. And I'm not on Twitter anymore, but some people were sending me tweets from people that we used to know,
Mhm.
who are going along with this 100%. And these are people who are not stupid. They have to know that all of this is bullshit, but they go along with it. Pretty much every single thing that Trump said to President Ramaphosa was simply not true.
Yes.
And I guess I give Ramaphosa credit for staying calm. On the other hand, I wouldn't have minded if he didn't stay
It's
calm.
honestly, like, I
Say
just
it. Say it.
one day, I want one of these meetings to actually end with somebody slapping the shit out of him.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
honestly, like, I know that people make those AI, like, generated videos, they did it with, Zelensky and, like, and others, but one day, I just want somebody just very quickly to haul off and slap the shit out of this man in the midst of one of his lies. And speaking of people that needs to just be slapped, like everyone just deserves to just be slapped at this point. And I know that I'm not supposed to condone violence, but at some point you're just going to push me too far. But so Democrats, okay, that's who I'm talking about. Democrats are once again talking about it's going to be, as Politico stated, chaos. Messy Democratic primaries could hurt parties' chances of retaking the House. Because guess what? There are some folks who want to primary Democrats who aren't actually functioning like Democrats. I know that it's crazy. I know
Yeah.
that we should just allow people to, literally just sit in these seats and do absolutely nothing until they die there. And that just be what it is. We shouldn't question their inertia. We shouldn't want more for the country or for the party. We should just be happy with what we get. And so now people are talking about, oh, there's division. There should be fucking division. Because look, and I will say this, that sadly, Jerry Conley passes away, 75 years old, cancer, right? And that is horrible. It is a tragedy for him, for his family. However, establishment Democrats, knowing that this man had cancer, backed him to be the ranking member of oversight against a healthy, young, smart, sharp woman that is Representative AOC. If that is not just, Andy, like the perfect picture of where Democrats find themselves in this moment, I don't know what is.
3 Democrats in Congress have died during this session. And that is obviously awful. Nobody wants them to die. But like you said, it is emblematic of what's going on with the Democratic Party here. And for them to now be sitting there, party insiders or whatever, complaining that, oh, there's going to be this messy primary season. How awful is this? You know what? Do better jobs. Don't get primaried.
So it's so easy.
Stop, maybe when you reach a certain age or a certain level of health, don't run for reelection. As you said, Daniel, it's so easy. This is so easily avoidable. This gerontocratic nonsense has to stop. That's what's hurting the Democratic Party, not the idea that there are people out there that are looking at the work that their representatives are doing and thinking, I'm gonna take a run at this myself because I don't like the job they're doing. That's not hurting the Democratic Party. I'm sorry. It just isn't. That's what you want in a healthy
Mm-hmm.
party. You want
Mm-hmm.
competition. You want people saying, I could do a better job. You are not entitled to that seat. There's this level of entitlement that you see from party leaders and party insiders, and it's just, no, I'm sorry. You are not entitled to that seat. And the fact that you've had that seat for 20, 30 years, I'm not saying there aren't upsides to that, but there are downsides. And regardless, that doesn't mean you should have it for another 10 years. There's a reason that there are elections every 2 years in the House and every 6 years in the
In the
Senate.
Senate,
And
yeah.
that's a referendum on the job you're doing. And so if people are running against you, yeah, I understand. You don't like that referendum. You don't like the fact that there are
Mm-hmm.
people out there saying they don't like the job you're doing. But as you said, Danielle, it's easy. Do a better job.
Do a better job.
Yeah.
I don't, I honestly, I don't understand like the idea that we should just get along, just keep on, keep
Yeah.
on keeping on as if we're not experiencing and living inside of what the status quo in the Democratic Party has served us, right? Like we're not just here in this political moment because of Donald Trump and Republicans. We're also here because of establishment Democrats that make money and hold their positions of power by holding up the status quo. And so for folks that are want to shake this up like the David Hoggs and others who were saying if you're in a Democratic seat and you have either voted alongside Republicans or not, a sure bet on our issues, you're gone. So, you know what? No, you should not be holding on to that seat with your cold dead hands, essentially, is what we're saying.
Yeah.
Do a better job. Folks, I am so excited to welcome to As the World Churns, Dr. Sweta Chakraborty, who is a behavioral scientist and CEO of North America for We Don't Have Time. I like the name, and it also makes sense. Right now, House Republicans have rushed through or jamming through what many have called and what I call on this show all the time a draconian budget, the big, beautiful bill that's filled with big, beautiful crap for the American people. Primarily, one of the areas that they have been hell bent on zeroing out, on rolling back, are the clean energy initiatives that have helped us try and tackle the climate crisis that we are currently living in, where we're seeing every season historic tornado season, historic fire season, historic hurricane season. Talk to us about why this is problematic at this time, at this stage of where we are, when climate change is no longer up for debate about whether or not it's happening, it's here, and what these rollbacks will do.
These rollbacks are gutting the American economy. That is the number one takeaway from what's happening here that should be at the forefront of all Americans' minds. Because all the jobs that were being created, everything that was, in motion, forget it being a benefit to planet. Of course, we need to usher in a clean energy era. We need to transition as fast as possible. But even if we remove the benefit to the planet, we are still removing 830,000 jobs by 2030. Think about that for a second. These would have been cleaner, healthier, better wealth producing jobs for Americans. And they're just being taken away by this bill. So that is what's so asinine about this is first and foremost the economic detriment to the American people. It's going to cost the United States more than $1 trillion in GDP by 2034. I mean, talk about the highest debt ceiling we've ever had. This is just hurting America's economy, making us less relevant as a global player. And as somebody who's been traveling outside of the US because it's been relatively depressing here, as you and your audience well knows, we're not competitive on the global landscape anymore. We are just handing on a silver platter the future of jobs and markets and energy to China, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're also increasing, this is the most obnoxious of it all, is we're increasing the price of power and energy by 50% by 2035. And that means something like an additional $100 minimum for Americans on average. You're going to be paying $100 more every year in your energy bill. And we have the technology to reduce that cost for
Mm-hmm.
Americans. We have the technology to reduce the cost and have global citizens access energy, and we are making it harder for people in the United States, the most developed country in the world. We're making it harder for them to access energy, and we're taking money out of their pockets because of it. So this ultimately is the biggest disaster coming out of this bill, is just how much of an economic hurt this is going to be to everyday Americans.
I've long thought that the conversation around climate change needed to be an economic one, that it was going to be an economic imperative, because even if you just take, again, the disasters that we've experienced in this country, whether it be the fires that burned for weeks in California, or the 23 or so tornadoes that touched down in the Midwest most recently, that the damage to those places amounts to billions of dollars, right? Billions of dollars that we know that this federal government through FEMA is no longer going to supply to states, and pretty much saying, like, you're on your own, which is what Trump did to the state of Alabama when they asked for federal funds for recent storms. He said, I think that the state can manage it. Do you think, though, that line of thinking would work better with the American people, not just those that are like creating policy or gutting policy, but that a message around jobs and creation and innovation would work better than just talking about what, again, it should be enough to say that the planet is dying and we're killing it, and we're killing our ability to be able to live and thrive, and we're creating climate refugees in this country and around the world. That should be enough. We know that it's not. So do you think that Democrats picking up, for instance, a economic message around climate change would be more resonant?
I think we've learned that the hard way. We see from the Kamala Harris election loss that that's the top line messaging that probably wasn't touted enough to really understand what is top of mind for everyday Americans. Ultimately, it is the money in their pockets, right? So I think the economic argument as a top line makes sense and should be sort of what we lead with. But then, as a behavioral scientist who studies communication, my ideal gold standard for communicating to Americans, or just generally to audiences, is to understand what they care about. And we haven't taken the time to do that, whether we're talking politics, climate change, infectious disease, all these different issues that ultimately their Americans' decisions are going to impact. We haven't taken the time to understand what their perceptions are before we communicate to them. So what I mean by that is actually asking them the questions, right? What is it that you care about? We've understood, for example, let me give you an analogy to the climate conversation, which is about eating less meat, right? Going from animal protein to more plant forward diets. And if you ask consumers why they make the switch, those who do, from animal protein to plant, they'll say one of three things. They'll say because it's a moral imperative that we stop factory farming and we treat animals better. That's one. And it could be some combination of all three of these, but it's usually one stands out more. So one is it's a moral imperative. The second one is that it's a sustainability issue, right? It's better for the planet that we do this. And then the third one is that it's a health issue. We want to just feel better. This is better for our bodies. So we have taken the time, the animal agriculture industry and those who fight against it have taken the time to understand what these perceptions are for their special interest, whatever that might be. As a climate community, we haven't taken the time to understand what really drives human behavior to be able to communicate accurately. So if we segment audiences and ask, what is it that you care about as it relates to climate? Those who have experienced disasters or disaster adjacent, right? Those who have actually lived through some sort of hurricane or flooding event or drought will probably say that it is the risk of being in another disaster
Mm-hmm.
or their first disaster. Those who haven't had that direct experience or adjacent experience, and this is the behavioral scientist in me again, in understanding cognitive perceptions of what's a risk and what isn't. Those who haven't experienced those risks firsthand or can't understand them, we should make the economic argument to them, right? Because that's what
Mm-hmm.
worries them first and foremost more. Or we make the health argument because air pollution is infecting them and their future generations. We're seeing increased allergies, we're seeing increased respiratory diseases. All of these sorts of things are examples of how we can communicate to and reach audiences based on what's important to them. And that's something we really need to step up and do better of. We shouldn't just throw spaghetti at the wall. Let's throw some social science at this, if anything, and understand perceptions to better communicate, to ultimately see behavioral change, like voting for the right president. We wouldn't be in this mess had we done that.
Correct. I think that that is really interesting because I feel like to a certain extent, we hear at least that people are polled all the time, right? Like that's how candidates, whether they be local, state, or national candidates, decide what issues they're going to run on, right? They focus group people to hell. And I always say, I'm just like, are you focus grouping the right people, right? Like whoever you believe to be this quote unquote, perfect example of American, who is that person? Where do they live and what are their daily experiences? And so when you say that we need to ask them, what does that actually look like? And have you seen it done well, for instance, in the other countries that you travel to?
Yeah, I mean, it needs to be academic driven and rather than where everyone's looking for a quick fix, right? But we need to take the time to actually use our knowledge, especially in the United States, where we have the best institutional research still to this day available out of anywhere on the planet. The United States should be driving research-based communication, and ultimately the outcome of that is better politicians being elected. And we are seeing pockets of that. We're not seeing a major collaborative effort because too many institutions are just out for themselves ultimately and just protecting their endowments. And it's not of benefit yet for institutions to collaborate. So we have to change that fundamentally. But we're seeing pockets of this. We're seeing, for example, Reverend Yearwood is running Climate Revival with Antonique Smith, and they're going to talk to underserved communities that have been historically disenfranchised, whose voices are not part of the conversation, that haven't been heard, and they are sampling these communities through trusted spokespeople like church leaders and soccer moms, etc. Those that are community leaders and that are influential to these different audiences. If we took the time to do that, if we really segmented America and took random samples from these segments and then were able to communicate to them through trusted spokespeople, we would see such a change in understanding the perceptions of climate, the perceptions of what it means for repealing these policies. Because to the average American, it doesn't mean anything. They didn't see an immediate benefit from the Inflation Reduction Act, and they're not going to see an immediate harm. But if we're able to communicate what it means in terms of an equitable future for communities through trusted spokespeople, then we don't have to get into the nitty gritty wonky policy, but we're talking big picture and ultimately garnering support for voting behavior and voting in elected representatives that are aligned to science and data and evidence, right? What is it that we want? Ultimately, what we want is politics and policy to align to science and evidence and data, not these alternative truths, alternative facts, but that we have science-based policymaking. That's the most secular, that's the most fair, that's the most equitable way forward. And the way to do that is to really sample randomly communities so that we can get an understanding of what the United States really looks like, what they care about, what their perceptions are. And it's going to vary a lot. What
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
communities in Cancer Alley care about are going to be health as it relates to climate and these
Mm-hmm.
policy actions that are happening at the federal level. What residents in Toms River, New Jersey care about is why they can't, why they can no longer live on these barrier islands that were flooded out during Hurricane Sandy, right? So we have to take the time to understand the different perceptions that exist in communities across the United States, find those trusted spokespeople, create relationships with them, and ensure that messages are being put forward in a way that are going to resonate and that behavior is going to be an outcome of that message. We don't need to hit people over the head with numbers. That doesn't work. We know that doesn't work. That's like communication science 101. Let's actually deploy trusted spokespeople instead. There's an idea.
Another thought that I want you to unpack for us as well, which is this, right? You spoke earlier about the fact that basically the Republican Party, with this rollback in climate, energy, research, science, like truth, data, all of these things, are creating a vacuum, right, in the world, one that China is readily walking into. Can you speak more to that and what China and other countries are doing and what you foresee happening with America's role in the world from taking this major step back?
Oh, this one hurts because America used to be where everyone wanted to go. I'm an immigrant, right? I'm the daughter of immigrants. And I remember just how proud our family in India was when my parents made it over to the United States. And then I was the first generation born here. And I think that existed pretty much until till the first Trump election, where the United States was still seen as the gold standard for ingenuity and for leading in the future, and the future
Mm-hmm.
is a
Mm-hmm.
transition to clean energy. And we had in Biden's administration this goal. This could have been accomplished. There was a pathway to accomplishing full electrification of transportation by 2030. And so not only is that not happening, it has been picked up by China. And I think one of the most shocking, or rather, the biggest about face that I've experienced in my lifetime as being a daughter of immigrants is the United States going from being that gold standard and leading on all things transition to clean energy, more recently, all things just innovation, right? Just innovation
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that is founded in science, that's entrenched in science, that supports a future that is brighter and more breathable and more equitable. All of these things that America stood for. That about face is probably the biggest shock
Mm-hmm.
to me in my generation, because I now see those same family members that were excited about us being Americans. They're saying how sorry they are for us. And a lot of the next generation, so my cousins, for example, and their kids are looking to Asia to travel to and study. And China is really picking up the mantle here in terms of this transition. Of course, there's still a massive polluter and there's human rights abuses. And the last thing we want is for China to become the global leader for those reasons on the transition to clean energy. But anywhere you go now in the world, you're seeing electric cars. China's really
Yep.
taken over
Yep.
Chinese electric cars. They've
Yep.
really taken over the global market for that. And they're really building the infrastructure around that as well. So if to purchase a electric vehicle, it's going to be a Chinese electric vehicle, and then all of the accessories and bells and whistles that comes with it is also being produced from China. So we really just handed over a lot of our potential market share and a lot of our potential future innovation, which is what attracts the best and the brightest from around the world. We've handed that over to China and other countries. So what does that mean for the future of the United States, right? As in, what's in the pipeline? If we are not leading the future of clean energy, what is in our pipeline? What is America going to be known for? Some like throwback to some nostalgic future that is never going to exist again is just not going to happen. It's some delusional fantasy is
Mm-hmm.
being propagated by the current Trump administration. And instead, the reality and the future of the planet and who leads it, we've handed over to Asia and China specifically.
I'll tell you, because I too am a child of immigrants, and I will say that it is. I think that for me is probably one of the most heartbreaking things about where we are is
Exactly.
how my family came from Jamaica and how like excited and proud they have been of making it right into America and making it in America and living out what they believed their American dreams were, only to now be in a space of thinking about going back to Jamaica because America is no longer safe.
Exactly.
But it also, again, what you're speaking to a lot of is the brain drain, right, is the fact that the bright thinkers, the innovators, the change makers are not going to see America as a place that they are going to come for university, that they're going to come, for jobs. And so what does that mean? I think that it means that America becomes a shell of itself. I think that America is going to look more over these next 4 years plus, is going to look more like modern day Russia than it is going to look like anything else, which is depressing as hell.
So I was in Europe recently for work, and I walked into a restaurant, and it was a Russian waitress, and she asked where I was from, and I said, America, and she said, welcome to the club. That's what I heard. And I didn't process it immediately. I sat down and I was like, do you mean what I think you mean? And she's like, yeah, the world is viewing you the way the world views Russia. So welcome to the club. Audiences can't see our faces right now, but
Oh no, they'll see her. Like, that is fucking awful.
since
That
when?
is awful.
Within 4 years, we have joined the ranks of Putin's Russia. I mean, we were worried about coming back into the United States. We were talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not the America that our parents brought us to. This is not
Yeah.
what we were excited about growing up in and having our children. We thought we were going to be propagating the American dream. And instead, we're watching it fold in front of us because ultimately, especially with this bill that just made its way through House, I mean, very tightly, right? But still, it made its way through the House despite the Republicans that recognize that so much of the benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act and all of the what's already been passed is benefiting Republican districts. It's the New York representative that is leading 20 Republicans to try and ensure that the repeal doesn't affect their districts, because ultimately this legislation is creating jobs and benefit and economic opportunity. It's going in the right direction. And Republicans see that. They just need to have a spine right now so that we are not we are not bringing into reality a future that we can see what it would look like because it's Russia.
Yeah. Well, we will leave it there today, Dr. Chakraborty. I thank you so much for your time and just your honesty in laying out the picture of where America is headed for us. Really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Yevgeny Prigozhin was a close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin right up until a few months before the plane he was on mysteriously exploded/crashed en route from St. Petersburg to Moscow in August of 2023. My next guest is the author of the new book, Putin's Sledgehammer, the Wagner Group and Russia's Collapse into Mercenary Chaos. This book takes a look at Prigozhin's life as well as the history of the paramilitary organization he led, known as the Wagner Group. Candace Rondeaux directs Future Frontlines, a public intelligence service for next generation security and democratic resilience, and the Planetary Politics Initiative at the New America Foundation. She's also a professor at Arizona State University, and she joins me now. Candace, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
It felt like maybe not too long after Putin's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Yevgeny Prigozhin and the Wagner Group were suddenly very much in the news. Tell us how we got here, starting with Prigozhin. What's his origin story?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long arc, and it does not bend toward justice. I can say that straight up.
Yeah.
I mean, Yevgeny Prigozhin begins his life in St. Petersburg. He's born into an okay middle-class family, but very quickly his father dies when he's very young. His mother is actually a doctor, and so they're you would consider them sort of upper middle class, nice sort of Jewish family, or at least sort of mixed Jewish and Christian family. Sort of the tail end of the Soviet era, although nobody knew it was the tail end then. He grew up having this ambition to become a ski master. Actually, he was a champion cross-country skier. His stepfather got him a place at what was then the #1 Olympic Academy in the country in St. Petersburg. He went to school as a young boy, a boarding school as a young boy, with Olympic champions. So he had these kind of grand visions of what his future was going to be like. Didn't really work out that way. What we know is that he had some sort of accident that threw him into a life of crime. And he, was a young teenage gangster running around the streets of St. Petersburg, terrorizing local neighbors. And that got him his first, duel with prison, basically. He spent 9 years in prison on charges of violent assault and thuggery, which was kind of a crime then in the Soviet Union.
Right.
And and he kind of transformed his life in prison. That's one of the things that's really important to understand about him, because, of course, as you know, later on he becomes very involved in recruiting prisoners to join
Right.
his army. So his origin stories start there, but his political career, or his importance to Russian history, and his nexus to Putin, starts at the start of the collapse of the Soviet Union. He comes home from prison to St. Petersburg. His stepfather, has a hot dog business that he helps manage, and he grows it into this sort of mini empire of kiosks. And around the same time, Vladimir Putin is returning home from a long stint in East Germany as a KGB agent, where he had been handling so-called illegals, undercover, spies that were distributed all across Europe. Their roads converge just as the Soviet Union is collapsing. And Vladimir Putin becomes deputy mayor. And he also becomes basically the man with his hand on the lever of almost every aspect of business in the city of St. Petersburg, including licensing casinos, licensing grocery stores, licensing restaurants. And it just so happened that Yevgeny Prigozhin had interest in all three of those businesses. And they were brought together in part because of that sort of business relationship. Over time, I think Prigozhin became a really trusted, but shadow aide
Right.
for Putin's political retinue. Importantly, he became the Kremlin's chief caterer, and
Right.
he, right, like he kind of provided Putin with banquets for kings and queens. Whenever there was like a state visit from the U.S. president, famously, of course, he provided dinner for George and Laura Bush when they visited St. Petersburg on several occasions. And so his rise to power was really very much tied to Putin's rise to power. And he followed him, or at least his businesses started to follow Putin to Moscow. And most importantly, he became a defense contractor extraordinaire in the early 2010s as the Russian military was transforming itself. So the origin story of Prigozhin begins there, but how he ends up leading the Wagner Group is a whole other story.
Well, let's get into that a little bit. So, what's sort of the origin story of the Wagner Group, and then how do they intersect?
The origin story of the Wagner Group is really about structural factors in the political economy of a country that has just gone through one of the greatest economic free falls, probably in recent modern times. The collapse of the Soviet Union led Russia into this, raging debt pit. It inherited the debt of its partners and neighbors, so notably Ukraine. It inherited debt from over expenditure on the war in Afghanistan. And one of the most important things is, while Prigozhin and Putin are making their way and sort of cutting it up as sort of new masters of the universe in St. Petersburg, there is this rise of sort of two important forces at the same time. And one is the rise of the mafia class, these kind of criminal underground contingents, most notably the Tambov crew, that start to merge with the security agencies in terms of an alignment of shared interests. There's kind of a marriage of convenience. And most importantly, they are the source of hiring of former Russian veterans who served in the Afghan war, who were really this huge disaffected group of men, on the order of certainly over 1 million, who sort of churned through one way or the other Afghanistan and the military over the 10-year period before the collapse. This merger between the mafia and state security agencies and the veterans is kind of the soup, or the sea out of which the Wagner Group grows from the 1990s. The real kind of catalyst was a decision by the Duma and Putin at the time to try and reorganize state enterprises, most notably Gazprom, which is the big gas company, Rosneft, which is a huge oil company, and then what we now know as Rostec. Those three companies provide huge amounts of sovereign wealth for Russia. And in 2007, Putin and the Duma passed legislation allowing those companies to hire their own security agencies, which effectively allowed them to hire their own private paramilitaries, but they're only kind of
Right.
private in name because the organizations that they work for, these state enterprises, are literally controlled end to end by the Kremlin. Even the chiefs of staff, the CEOs of these, of Gazprom, Rosneft, Rostec, they're all presidentially appointed. So they're only private in name, basically. It is there that you start to see the burgeoning of these small private military contingents. And it is in 2013, on the tails of the Arab Spring uprisings that really rock everybody's world, including Putin's, that Putin and Russia's military leaders begin to insert these private contractors into Syria as a means of supporting Bashar al-Assad. So really, people think of the beginning of the Wagner Group as 2014 in Ukraine. It's actually much earlier than that. It really starts with the Syrian war. That's the big catalyst because Russia doesn't want to go full bore
Right.
because of the risk of confrontation with the United States. And so they send in these ghost warriors, basically. Including, most notably, Dmitry Utkin, who is the sort of nom de plume, as it were, or the nom de guerre, Wagner, comes from Dmitry Utkin. He adopted that call sign back when he was working in Syria and then later in Donbass. So the origin story is really about sort of the economics of, collapse, and then the economics of trying to revive Russia's state-owned industries. And the mix here, the glue was that mafia culture and those veterans that were disaffected. It really starts there.
Wow. And the Wagner Group was known for its brutality. And when I say known, I don't mean that there were like whispers about it. I mean, they very much wanted it to be known and they very much publicized their brutality, didn't they? There are stories you tell in the book that I gotta be honest, I wish I hadn't read.
Well, I wish I hadn't watched all that footage. I got to tell
Yeah,
you,
I'm sure. God.
I probably watched
Uh,
the footage of the Sledgehammer murder of Hamdi
oh my
Bouta. I
God.
don't know how many times, and it still haunts me to this day, to be honest with you. Yeah, I mean, look, the Wagner Group is a reflection of all of the things that I've just mentioned: mafia
Right.
culture, disaffected veterans, tough guys who are brought up in tough guy military culture, and for folks who are not as familiar with Russia's military apparatus, one of the more notorious branches for brutality, or at least, for psychological warfare, is known as the VDV Airborne. VDV just stands for Airborne Forces, basically. And so the Airborne Forces of Russia, they're also known as the Blue Berets. They're kind of like our, Green Berets in terms of kind of,
Mhm.
the legendary macho man,
Right.
out there doing hard stuff in hard places. So that's most of the early cadre of the Wagner Group came from the airborne forces or other elite, shock troop forces that were part of the interior forces, police, elite police forces as well. And so they all had that mental cast of like brutality wins the day, basically. And in the Wagner Group, there was a sort of sadism. Actually, there's one defector that I talked to. His name is Murat Gabidul, and he talked about how the commanders in the Wagner always wanted to be more cruel than Prigozhin. They wanted to show their
Ugh.
loyalty to Prigozhin. They often did like really crazy stuff to prove their prowess, and it became a little bit of a kind of self-licking ice cream cone in a way. This brutality, but also, of course, there is a value, in sort of broadcasting or advertising your appetite for brutality, right? Especially in places where you're at war, you're trying to control contested territory. If people think that Wagner is cruel and that Wagner is coming, maybe people will back off and,
Right.
there'll be less resistance. So that's really what it's about.
Okay, so we have this history of the Wagner Group, which is now being used in Ukraine. We have the long-standing close relationship between Putin and Prigozhin, and one of the things you write about is how secretive that relationship was for so long, and it went back much further than I guess we sort of originally knew. But how does all of that come crashing down in 2023? For those of us not in the know, it seemed very sudden. You have a trusted ally who launches what is essentially a coup attempt, and soon after that, he dies, more than likely killed by the man he turned against. But you say there were actually signs earlier than that, that there was going to be this fracture between these longtime allies, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are structural factors, and then there's just like personality problems that came up, right? The structural piece was Yevgeny Prigozhin and the Wagner Group as a brand, as a concept, having a proxy army that would fight, in these foreign wars like in Syria, Mali, Sudan, Central African Republic, Libya. Having that kind of capacity is super useful as long as it's deniable, right?
Right.
As long as you can kind of paint a picture that the Kremlin has nothing to do with those people who are involved in their own private corporate enterprise. And that starts to break down almost the minute the Wagner Group is called to mobilize to the front line in Ukraine. Because now you're in a situation where it's clear that Russia has called them, first of all, right? And that they've answered the call coming from the Kremlin.
Right.
It's clear that they're fighting on the side of Russia, and there's no sort of two ways about it, basically. So the mask or the veil is lifted very quickly in spring of 2022, but it's really when Yevgeny Prigozhin steps out of the shadows and into the limelight, with that very famous video where he's in the prison courtyard saying like, "Join Wagner. What do you got to lose? You could spend your life here, rotting away in this prison, or you can go on the front line and gamble, and maybe you'll get amnesty, but your families will get money no matter what happens." And that was like this moment of sort of revelation, I think, for the world. Not for me, and I think not for people who were paying attention to what
Right.
was going on with Prigozhin, but that was a big revelatory moment. But it was precisely at that moment that Prigozhin became even less useful, right? The minute that he appeared to be somebody who was tied to Russia, he was also therefore tied to all of these atrocity crimes and war crimes that had occurred all over the world in the name of the Wagner Group, in the name of Russia. So that was a huge liability. So that's the structural factor. It's just the minute that the Wagner Group kind of came out of the shadows, the plausible deniability factor and the usefulness and the relevance became less of a factor for Putin. But I think the other piece was that there was this ongoing rivalry and people who were paying
Right.
attention to the Wagner Group, and it dated back years, right, between Yevgeny Prigozhin and Sergei Shoigu, who was then the Minister of Defense, a guy who had no military training, just like Prigozhin. Neither one of them had any military training, but they both wanted to be, big major domos. They had a lot of bad blood. And there were lawsuits, for instance, between the Ministry of Defense, the Kremlin, and Prigozhin's companies that were leaked. We could see those in the files. There were near fisticuffs between some people who were associated with defense ministry that were meant to be rivals to Prigozhin and so forth. But it's really in April of 2023, and you might remember this actually, when Yevgeny Prigozhin, he's out there on the battlefield, everybody knows him, and then suddenly there's a bombing, right, where this young military blogger, ultranationalist military blogger, who was pro-Wagner, associated with the Wagner Group very publicly, and had been given permission by Prigozhin to run, this kind of military blogger
Mhm.
cafe scene out of one of his restaurants in St. Petersburg. Well, he gets blown up in April of 2023, and there couldn't be any more clear message. I think that that somebody was coming for Prigozhin. So I mean, there were a lot of these little hints. Many of them were subtle if you weren't really paying attention to the long history of Prigozhin's relationship with Putin.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And as you say in the book, I only have like a minute left, but I want to get to this. Much of what we came to know about Prigozhin was due to the extraordinary and sometimes extraordinarily dangerous work of journalists, dissidents, online investigators like Bellingcat. But speak a little to that and how important these people were to uncovering all of this.
Yeah, Yevgeny Prigozhin's downfall was really the fact that he couldn't keep anything secret, and
Right.
so many people were obsessed with trying to uncover what was behind the Wagner Group. I want to just absolutely mention Bellingcat, but of course there are a lot of Russian reporters, Ukrainian reporters, who really put their lives on the line
Yeah.
to to tell this story. And if it hadn't been for them, I don't think we'd know today anything about Yevgeny Prigozhin, and maybe he'd still be alive, frankly, if all of those secrets hadn't been revealed.
Right. Wow, that's so interesting. The book is Putin's Sledgehammer. It is out now. It's an absolutely fascinating look at this story, and I encourage people to go pick it up. Candace Rondeaux, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Danielle, let's close out this week. This is is this week 3 of As the World Churns?
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
Happy anniversary.
Happy 3rd week anniversary. A huge one. Generally considered, the 3rd week is generally considered a really big anniversary. Or maybe that's just for me because I rarely have relationships that last that long.
Oh, shit. Well, our relationship has lasted for years, so I love
True.
that for
That's
us.
true. That's true. Helped by the fact that we've never met in person, probably. So who is your fuck that guy to close out week 3?
So, oh God, he's a new person to put into our marble fuck that guy Hall of Fame. The disgust that I have in my mouth for the one Senator Cory Booker. A couple of weeks ago, I was singing your praises, Cory Booker. I was talking about how, sometimes political theater is necessary in order to disrupt the status quo, that your 25.5-hour filibuster on the floor to talk about how fascism has come to America and that we cannot continue to do what we've always done, right? That you wanted to sit there and quote John Lewis and talk about good trouble. I was on your side. And then this week happened. And what happened this week? Well, following his 2020 pardon for federal crimes, Charles Kushner, a convicted felon, Jared Kushner's daddy, has been nominated, of course, because there's nothing that gets you nominated more and elevated in Trump world more than having a rap sheet, right? So he gets nominated to become the ambassador to France and is sitting before the Senate for his confirmation hearing. And Cory Booker was the lone fucking Democrat to vote yes on his friend Charlie's confirmation. And I just want to remind people about the character of Charles Kushner. Not only was he found guilty for bribes and for insider trading and what have you, this man hired a prostitute to sleep with his sister's husband, videotape it, to send as blackmail to his sister so that she would stop cooperating with the feds against him. What in the Succession mob type of shit is that? That's his family.
Yeah.
When I read that, I'm like, what in the Lifetime movie is this?
It's some Game of Thrones shit.
It's some Game of Thrones, really? And admitted to it. So this is not even like, allegedly. He admitted to it. And Cory Booker looked at this motherfucker and said, thumbs up over here on my side. Come to find out, he has a long relationship with the Kushners, who have donated donated to his first mayoral run, donated to multiple Senate runs to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars, refers to him as Charlie. And this is why I say that when people express the reasons why they don't vote, the reasons why they think that both parties ain't shit, it's because they literally are suckling the same fucking billionaire tit. And it always comes back to the money. So for that reason, I am just so fucking disgusted with you, Cory Booker. You are my fuck that guy this week.
Yeah, no argument here. I do have to say, though, that Charles Kushner, in his confirmation hearing, he said, I don't sit before you here today and tell you I'm a perfect person. I'm not a perfect person. I'm not a perfect person.
You're a scumbag.
Charles Kushner hired a sex worker to seduce his sister's husband and videotape it so he could blackmail his own sister. There's a lot of room between not being a perfect person and hiring a sex worker to seduce your sister's husband and film it so you can blackmail your sister. Like, to wave that away by saying, hey, you know,
I'm not a perfect person.
Po body's nerfict, am I right? I mean, it's just like the lack of shame of all of these people is just absolutely wild to me. And yeah, obviously the fact that Cory Booker thought to himself, well, this is a guy who helped me out a bunch of years ago, so I'm doing the right thing by voting for him. No, you're not. And yeah, fuck that guy.
So, Andy, who are you ushering into our marble hall of fuck that guy fame to close out our 3rd anniversary week?
I am going to go with our Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, who thinks that immigration and that deporting people without due process is a reality TV show. And in this case, she was at a Senate hearing earlier this week and was asked about habeas corpus. And she said, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country. Now, you don't have to speak Latin to know what the literal translation of habeas corpus is to understand that in the legal realm, habeas corpus it basically means produce the body. You have to produce evidence. You can't just do things to people without producing evidence. You know, and that's what due process is. Due process is if the federal government says that you are a terrorist or a criminal and you need to be deported, they have to prove that you are a terrorist or a criminal before they can deport you. And this is obviously being blatantly ignored by this administration. And here we have the head of Homeland Security not only not knowing what habeas corpus means, but where does she come up with that it means that the president has to be able to remove people from this country? Like, that's not even close. Like, that's not, I'll give you a C, you tried, or I'll give you a D at least. That's a straight up, that's an F.
F.
I mean, you failed. Like, you didn't do the reading. You like that's the kind of answer.
She did not do the reading.
No,
of
she
the
didn't do the reading.
Constitution.
I don't know if she got her information from some broke ass AI, but because that does sound like the kind of thing that OpenAI or any one of those stupid things would give you. But you know, shout out to Senator Maggie Hassan from New Hampshire, who actually interrupted Noam and said, excuse me, that's incorrect, which is the understatement of the year. But she went on to explain what I just said. You have to give a reason for detaining people, for deporting people, for putting people in prison. And as Senator Hassan said, if not for that protection, the government could simply arrest people, including American citizens, and hold them indefinitely for no reason, which is what this particular administration wants to do. Yeah, a hearty shout out to Kristi Noem as my fuck that guy to end this week, because my God, at least give me a C effort. You know, give me a gentlewoman's C. Don't just get up there and fail.
At this point, just lie to us and make us believe that you've read the Constitution at least once. Make us believe that you at least have seen the Sparks version or the fucking Cliff Notes version, you know, like anything. The other day I thought to myself, you know, if Kristi Noem or Kash Patel or frankly any member of the Trump administration were given the citizens test, right?
Oh,
The
yeah.
test that citizens have to take in order to
Yep.
become citizens in this country. I mean, they would fail. And so what
Oh,
I want is like the next time that poor excuse for a human being is on Capitol Hill at a committee hearing, which I'm sure will be soon. I want the Democrats who are on that committee to one by one ask questions from the citizenship test
that's a great
to
idea.
see if she would actually and be like, and so with each one, and she's like, do you know the answer to this? Do you know but you're in charge of deporting people from this country and you don't know a fucking thing about it. So
Yeah.
I would love to see that. That's a free idea, Democrats. Free idea. Okay. The next one I'll charge you for. Maybe you'll send me a plane. Fuck that guy.